Over 5,000 years ago, a man climbed up through the Tisenjoch Pass in the Ötztal Alps on the border of what is now Italy and Austria. As he climbed, he was shot in the back with an arrow and bled to death. And then it began to snow, and he was frozen, preserved for 5,000 years. That man was Ötzi the Iceman. And today we know that only hours before he was killed, he ate a last meal of wild goat, deer, and einkorn wheat. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as I recreate the last meal of Ötzi the Iceman, this time on Tasting History. So the kitchen is still being worked on, so I am in my bar area where I usually sometimes do drinking history, but today it's tasting history. And actually, it's not really tasting history, it's tasting prehistory, because Ötzi was around before there was any form of writing. There may have been some writing in the Sumer area and Egypt, but where Ötzi was, in Central Europe, no writing. He lived during a time before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, but not before farming. And that's something that I find really interesting about Ötzi. It's about when he lived, because this is a period where farming had come up through Turkey and the Balkans and had pretty much established itself all over Europe. But there are still little pockets of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that are still eking out a living in Europe. And his last meal has ingredients from both of these worlds, and they come together in his last meal. And I find it fascinating that we even know what his last meal was, because researchers have been able to study his stomach and digestive tract and see what it was that he was eating in the hours and even days before he died. And just a couple hours before that fateful arrow hit him in the back, he had a meal of red deer and ibex, which is a wild mountain goat that would have been hunted. But then he also had einkorn in his stomach, and that is a grain which is probably the first grain that was ever cultivated and farmed, and has really remained unchanged over the last 12,000 years. Now einkorn, I got, easy. Red deer, little harder to get, but I got. Ibex meat, I don't got. I could not find anyone who could get me ibex meat. I couldn't even find anyone who could get me wild goat at this time of year. So I am just using regular domesticated goat meat for that. The other ingredient that I'm going to be using is a bit of fiddle fern. See, in addition to the meat and the grain, Ötzi had small amounts of pollen and different funguses and moss in his stomach, as well as a little bit of fern. Now, the fern that he had was a type of bracken, which can be used medicinally, and that's probably how he ate it, especially because there was such a small amount, but it can also be toxic. Now, I'm sure he knew exactly how much to eat, so he wouldn't die. I don't know that, so I'm not going to try it. But I do have fiddle ferns, and those are perfectly edible, and they are a fern very close to the bracken-ish. So that's what I'm going to be using, and it's frankly such a small amount that it's not going to really have much effect on the flavor in general. And I like to stick to foods that I know are edible, like the edible foods that come with every box from HelloFresh, our sponsor today. HelloFresh delivers fresh ingredients right to your door, and with over 45 weekly recipes, they have something for everyone. Whether you're vegetarian or pescatarian, or if you have a picky eater in your house, they have family-friendly meals. Personally, I am all about saving time, so I usually opt in for their quick and easy meals, which can take as little as 20 minutes to make. Now, I lost my kitchen recently, and it'll be a little while before I have a new one, but my very last meal that I cooked in that kitchen was a HelloFresh meal. The grilled cheese sandos with sun-dried tomatoes. And I kind of feel like sun-dried tomatoes aren't used as much as they used to be, and I don't know why, because they are delicious, as were those sandwiches. HelloFresh also has a line of appetizers, like these delectable bagel dogs. And right now, when you visit HelloFresh.com and use my code TASTINGHISTORYAPPS, you will get free apps for life. That is one free appetizer with every box while the subscription is active. That's Tasting History Apps at HelloFresh.com for free appetizers for life. Now, while HelloFresh gives you well-written recipes so you know exactly how to cook the food, Ötzi's stomach didn't have a recipe with it, so we don't really know how he cooked his food, but I am going to start off with the ibex meat, or the goat meat. and it was probably dried. Now, you can put this into a dehydrator and basically make jerky. That works, but he wouldn't have added any like seasonings or anything, maybe some salt. So it will be very, very bland if you do that. He probably would have smoked it next to a fire, and that smoke would have helped to flavor the meat. So that's what I'm going to do. So I sliced my goat into thin slices and then set it on the grill beside some hot coals and some wood to add that smoky flavor. I also set a tray beneath the meat to catch the fat because we are going to use that later. Now, smoking meat this way is actually kind of hard because you don't want to cook it. So it needs to be a very, very low temperature, about 160 or 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's going to take like 6, 8, even 10 hours to dry out. I actually left mine on a little bit too long and it kind of becomes hard and brittle, which is not a bad thing. It's just I would have preferred more of a jerky texture, and so that would have taken less time. You can also put some water in it and near it, and that'll keep moisture in. I didn't do that. Now when it comes to the red deer, we could also smoke that and have that preserved, but then I'm just really doing the same thing. So instead, I'm going to put it over an open flame, which he might have done. So again, I made a wood fire in my barbecue, put the meat onto a skewer, and just set it over that for about 5 or 6 minutes so we could get a nice char on it. Now both of those are very simple, straightforward ways of eating meat, especially because he didn't have any marinades or anything like that. What is not as straightforward is how he ate his einkorn. Was it in a porridge that he made, like boiled, or was it some sort of pancake, like a flatbread, that he could have cooked on a hot stone? That's what I'm going to do, but frankly, we don't know. What we do know is that he didn't grind it all the way down to like a fine flour. It was very coarsely ground because they found some pretty big pieces in his stomach. So that's what I'm going to do. So I took whole grains and I ground them down to kind of a flour, but also leaving some big pieces as well. And then I added the melted fat from the drying of the goat. Now, of the 300 grams of food that was in Ötzi's stomach, half of it was ibex fat. Unfortunately, my goat just didn't give off that much fat. I'm pretty sure it was about a tablespoon, so I also had to add some water just to make the einkorn come together to be able to form some sort of pancake. Here too is where I decided to rinse some fiddle ferns and chop them up very fine and add them in to hopefully add some flavor to what could be a very bland pancake. So to cook it similarly to the way that Ötzi would have, I took a clay comal and set it right next to the fire until it got nice and hot so it sizzled when I added water to it, and then I formed a cake out of some of the batter and set it on. I cooked it for about 3 minutes on one side and then flipped it and cooked it for another 3 minutes. Now again, this is just one possible way that Ötzi might have prepared his last meal. You can only tell so much from stomach contents. What's amazing is how much they can tell from stomach contents and from his digestive tract. Other things that they found in there and on his person have led researchers to basically recreate the final hours leading up to Ötzi's last meal. On September 19, 1991, 2 German tourists were hiking in the Ötztal Alps at the Austria-Italy border when they came across a body. At first they believed that it was a deceased hiker, but then they realized it was definitely older, so maybe it was a lost World War I soldier. But then researchers quickly realized that it was much older than that. It was the body of a man who had lived between 3,359 and 3,105 BC, over 5,000 years ago. And as his body did not come with a name tag, they named him Ötzi after the area in which he was found. Now, what is so remarkable about Ötzi is how well kept he was. He and many of the artifacts that were found with him, the belongings that he had, they were all mummified naturally by the ice and the snow. So yes, while he doesn't look great, he's actually so well preserved that it has led researchers to be able to learn a lot about him and the Chalcolithic or Copper Age during which he lived. Like typically, no clothing from this period survives today, but Ötzi was found wearing a full outfit. He had shoes with soles made of bearskin and red deer leather, and the upper portion was made with woven grass, which was then stuffed with more grass for insulation. He wore heavy deer hide leggings with patches of fur affixed to them, and the fur was different colors and alternated in a pattern, which implies that the man had a sense of fashion. Then over his torso he wore a coat of sheep and goatskin, as well as a sort of cape of woven grass that may have actually been used as a blanket. Then this was all topped off with a bearskin hat. In addition to clothes, he carried a sort of backpack, a fire-making kit, and a stone disc with leather thongs on which he would have tied birds that he had hunted. He also carried a knife, a sharpener, and several other woodworking and leatherworking tools. Then he had a quiver of 14 arrow shafts, 2 of which had arrowheads, and a bow made of yew wood. That is the same wood that would still be used to make longbows in England during the High Middle Ages. But perhaps most impressive of all was Ötzi's axe. All of the other tools and weapons that he had with him were typical Neolithic stone tools, but that axe was made of 99.7% pure copper. Now the blade was small, less than 4 inches long, but even so, this would have been a very valuable tool. He was also found with a pouch that had different fungi and mosses in it that were probably used medicinally. And the man needed medicine because at an age of 45 or 46, Ötzi was not in great health. Tests show that he suffered from heart disease, he had worn down teeth, gum disease, previously broken ribs, gallstone, frostbite on his toes, and an intestinal parasite called whipworm, which can cause severe abdominal pain. In addition, he may have had Lyme disease, though tests were inconclusive. But what is definite is that he had a lot of bone and joint issues, so he would have had severe pain in his ankles, his knees, his lumbar, and his shoulders. And the man was in his 40s, and I'm in my 40s, and I gotta say, it kind of checks out. What's curious is that in addition to all of these ailments, Ötzi had 61 tattoos, which were likely thought to be ways of treating the pain. Then he also had 3 other injuries that he probably sustained very close to the time that he died. One was a severe head wound that probably would have caused bad brain damage. Another was a cut on his right hand between his thumb and his index finger that went all the way down to the bone. Some scientists think that that happened within 24 hours of his death. Others say it could have happened up to a week or more, but either way, it was still healing. Then there is a third injury that went completely unnoticed for 10 years. It wasn't until 2001 that scientists discovered an arrowhead lodged in Ötzi's shoulder. And it would have been shot in there only minutes before he died. And this discovery is what led researchers to determine that Ötzi the Iceman was murdered. Now there are just too many unknowns to definitively say what happened. Like, was he being chased by some villain, or was Ötzi the protagonist and just getting his comeuppance? Maybe he was someplace that he shouldn't have been. Maybe he was stealing something, like that axe, perhaps, or some food. Or maybe he was defending his friends and family by outside raiders. We just don't know. We also don't even know if he saw it coming, if he was running from someone, or he was taken completely by surprise. We don't even know if it was intentional. It could have been an accident. These are all questions that we will likely never know the answers to. But what's amazing is that researchers do have a lot of answers and have been able to put together some scenarios of what happened to Ötzi right before he died, and much of that information comes from what was found in his digestive tract. See, it wasn't only in his stomach that they found food, but all through his digestive tract at different levels of digestion. And it wasn't just food. There were other things like mosses and pollen and different liverworts that he probably ingested on accident. But they've allowed researchers to tell approximately where Ötzi was and when. Like, based on the pine and spruce pollen in his colon, they know he was in a high-altitude forest around 8,200 feet about 33 hours before he died. Moving further up the digestive tract, there was pollen that shows that he was in the forests of a much lower altitude, around 4,000 feet, or even lower, only 24 hours before he died. It was here that one possible explanation of what exactly happened to Ötzi begins to take shape, because it was there he received that wound on his hand. Researchers say that it is a defensive wound. So was there a fight? We don't know. What caused the fight, if there was one? We don't know. But whatever it was, Ötzi fled, because the distance that he covers in the next day or so is pretty impressive. Now, we stayed for some hours at the same elevation, moving along the valley floor, where at some point he finds some sphagnum, or bog moss, and uses it for something, likely to dress that wound on his hand, because one, it's very absorbent, and two, it actually has antiseptic properties. Now, it is possible that he didn't get it there, that he had been carrying it with him before, but for some reason, he was using it. Regardless, it's at this lower altitude that 8 to 12 hours before Ötzi died, he makes a meal, perhaps as a way to fuel himself for a rather frantic ascent up into the mountains. Possibly being pursued, which would account for his speed, he climbed, and within just a few hours, he had reached nearly a 10,000-foot elevation. And there again, he eats. And this is Ötzi's last meal. This is the meal that we're making today. Now, we don't know exactly where he was going, but he was likely trying to head through that pass to get to the other side of the mountains. But he never made it, because only an hour to 3 hours after he ate, Ötzi was shot in the back with an arrow, and it had an arrowhead made by the people who lived on the south side of the mountain. That arrowhead lacerated his left subclavian artery, and Ötzi began to bleed to death. He fell over and hit his head, and we don't know if the fall caused the head injury, or if it was his attacker dealing him one final death blow. But he received that head wound, and very soon after, he died. Now, he might have been dead already, or he might have still been living when his attacker or someone else came up and drew out that arrow, but only the shaft came, and the arrowhead remained in Ötzi's shoulder for 5,000 years, because soon after he died, it began to snow, and he was blanketed and frozen. And over the years, a glacier came over and covered him and all of his belongings, and they were preserved until 1991. Now, as I said, this is just one possible way that Ötzi spent his last days and hours before he died. We don't know. There are too many unknowns, so researchers are hesitant to make any definitive guesses about the way that he died or the way that Ötzi lived. But the one thing that they do know is that only hours before he died, he ate a meal of red deer, ibex, and einkorn. And here we are, the last meal of Ötzi the Iceman. All right, I'm going to actually start with a piece of the red deer that I just roasted. I feel it's the simplest of all of them. Actually pretty good. That's super gamey. I like gamey stuff, but super gamey. Could definitely use some salt or barbecue sauce. Ötzi didn't have that though. Now for the ibex meat, or the goat meat, so it's basically just jerky. It's rather dry. Again, I could have left it a little less and it wouldn't have dried so much, but here we go. It's not as crispy as I thought it would be, so that's actually not bad. Really smoky. That's actually really good. I didn't expect it to be. Because usually jerky has they put a lot of different salt and different marinades and stuff to give it flavor. This has nothing. I could eat that. I could just snack on that. That's really good. That said, it does get stuck in your teeth. It's gonna be there for a while. Finally, the pancake. So this is einkorn and goat fat and water and a bit of the fiddle fern. And you can see actual pieces of the fern in there. Can you see that? I can. Let me actually try to get one of those pieces. Here we go. Bon appetit. More flavorful than I expected. So I don't know that the fern adds much, you know, maybe it adds a little freshness, maybe, but there's not a lot. So mostly what you're getting is the flavor of the einkorn, which is actually pretty good. I think, you know, if it was just regular modern wheat, this would be bland, but the way that it is, it's kind of chewy. It kind of turns into more gumminess, but what it reminds me of, when I was a kid, one of the people that babysat me would give me these granola bars that were like unflavored. They were the most bland things as a kid, but that's what they remind me of. They were healthy, and actually it's kind of nice. It's kind of like, yeah, like granola bar, but without any sugar or any of the good stuff. Not bad. So I am very, very grateful that I live in, you know, now, where we have a lot more options when it comes to food, when it comes to how we prepare our food. But it is so amazing that people survived on this type of food for eons, for most of human history. And, you know, we're still able to find the remnants in the stomach of an Iceman. I don't know, I find it fascinating. I've always wanted to do a video on Ötzi, and I've kind of put it off and put it off and put it off. But now, without a kitchen, I was like, well, I got to cook outside. Hey, Ötzi cooked outside. I can cook outside. And Ötzi didn't have a Weber kettle grill, but I did, and that's what I did. Anyway, delicious, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.